Okay, good afternoon, Year 10. So today we're going to be focusing on two main cycles on Earth. We're going to be looking at the nitrogen cycle and then briefly about water transformations. So this fits in with what we were looking at in our last face-to-face lesson on the carbon cycle. So we looked at how carbon moves between living things and stores in the atmosphere. So in this one, we'll be looking at how nitrogen moves through living things and the atmosphere and also water as well. So as you can see there, and you may well be aware of this, nitrogen is it is the major gas in the atmosphere. It makes up nearly 80% of the gases in the atmosphere, so there's a lot of it in the air around us. But when the nitrogen is in the air, it's not really usable. It can't be used by living things. So it has to be fixed by organisms. And that basically means nitrogen fixation. It means it being turned into a form that is usable. Okay. So as I've said there are a couple of different organisms involved in nitrogen fixation. So nitrogen fixing bacteria will turn nitrogen into compounds like ammonia, which contains nitrogen. And then nitrifying bacteria will then convert ammonia into things like nitrite and then into nitrate. Nitrate is usable by plants. So nitrogen in the air gets fixed by bacteria, nitrogen fixing bacteria, and then nitrifying bacteria change the initial compounds that it's fixed into things like nitrite and then nitrate, which can be used by plants. So the nitrogen moves into the living things in that way. There are also denitrifying bacteria that will convert nitrogen in compounds back into nitrogen gas so it can move into the air. As well as bacteria, some nitrogen fixation also comes from lightning strikes. So when lightning hits, some nitrogen in the air gets fixed into compounds that can then get used by living things. Humans also play a big role in nitrogen fixation because when we do things like produce fertilizers, that fixes nitrogen into compounds as well. So I've just got a diagram here that really sums up the cycling of nitrogen. You have a similar diagram to this in the slides that I've given to you, but basically there is nitrogen present in the air. That nitrogen can get fixed by nitrogen fixing bacteria, which will turn it into ammonia. These nitrogen fixing bacteria can also fix nitrogen present in dead living things. So when plants and animals die, the nitrogen fixing bacteria will also work on them. So they change it from compounds like ammonia into nitrite. Nitrifying bacteria will turn it into nitrate, and that nitrate can then pass back into plants, and then it'll get eaten by animals and go into them. As well as that, I've also got a lightning strike here, and that's to indicate lightning fixing nitrogen as well. So you've got a similar diagram on your slides, so you can have a study of it, but it just shows the way that nitrogen is moving from the atmosphere into the soil, through living things, and so on and so forth. So just a brief bit about water transformations. So obviously there's a lot of water on the planet. Over about 2/3 of the planet is made up of water, the vast majority of that in the oceans. So two terms to be aware of are precipitation and evaporation. So precipitation is when water that is in the atmosphere falls to Earth, usually through rain, but it can also be through snow, sleet, hail, even fog. Those are all types of precipitation. And then evaporation is when water moves into the atmosphere as a gas. So there's a cycle going on between water precipitating, falling to Earth, and evaporating into the atmosphere. So most of the water on Earth is in the oceans, and there's a lot of evaporation from the oceans. That water will then move to land, and then when precipitation happens, it falls to land. Ultimately, most of that water that falls on land will end up back in the oceans. So it will flow back to the oceans over time. Some of it ends up getting frozen, but the vast majority over time will flow back to the oceans, and the cycle between water in the oceans and the land will continue. And as I've said there, humans also impact on the water cycle because we use water for all sorts of things. So for agriculture, for industry, for sanitation, we use large amounts of water for those things, and that impacts on the amount of water in the present for the regular cycles. And we also impact water by causing pollution as well. So hopefully that just gives you a basic overview of the nitrogen cycle and also water transformations. So feel free to rewatch bits of this video if you need a bit more info on that. You will see there is a worksheet on Google Classroom in relation to the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, and also the carbon cycle that we looked at in face-to-face learning. So work your way through that. And of course, if you need any help at any point, just log into Zoom. I'll be there all the way through the session. Okay, thank you.